Check this out, BCM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech, and today we get to revisit Sharuum the Hegemon. This is my all-time favorite Esper Artifact control build, where our primary focus is winning the game at different angles. That way our opponents can't really interact with us. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of fun, broken things with all these artifacts. So, let's get right into this. When she enters the battlefield, we can return any artifact from the graveyard back to the battlefield. This is going to be our primary win condition. We're going to have a couple of combos where we're going to make an exact copy of Sharuum, creating this enter the battlefield trigger when you have creatures entering the battlefield an infinite number of times. So, let's get right into this. First up are all the creatures. All these creatures and all these artifacts are going to synergize with each other in every single way possible. First up, we have Esper Sentinel, which is probably the best one-drop artifact creature in Commander right now. Anytime a opponent casts their first non-creature spell every single turn, we get to draw a card, unless they pay X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Now we have Disciple of the Vault. This is going to be a primary win condition when we have the Sharuum combo loop going. It's going to trigger whenever a artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. We can have target opponent lose 1 life. Now we have 2 creatures that are going to synergize together when they're put into the graveyard by returning themselves, and we're going to use other artifacts to help us do this. So we have Myr Retriever. Whenever Myr Retriever is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return another target artifact from our graveyard back to our hand. We also have Scrap Trawler. So if we have, let's say, Cart Clan Ironworks, which allows us to sacrifice artifacts for 2 colorless mana, we're going to create this infinite loop where Scrap Trawler and Myr Retriever are going to be returned, and we're going to produce infinite colorless mana. Now we have Sai, Master Thopterist. Anytime we cast an artifact spell, we get to create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. If we need to, we can pay a colorless and a blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. Now we have probably my personal favorite with Urza, Lord High Artificer. This guy is absolutely ridiculous. When he enters the battlefield, we get to create a construct where its power and toughness are equal to the total number of artifacts we control. But what makes this card absolutely insane, the static ability, we can tap an untapped artifact to add 1 blue mana. This is going to come in very handy later on, but I'll get to that in just a second. If we need to, we can pay 5 and we can shuffle our library. Then we get to exile the top card, and until end of turn, we can play that top card without paying its mana cost. Now we have Phyrexian Metamorph. This is the artifact creature that we're going to use to make a copy of Sharuum. When this enters the battlefield, it'll enter as an exact copy of Sharuum the Hegemon. So we're going to legend rule this out, and it's going to retain Sharuum's original trigger of returning a artifact back from our graveyard to the battlefield. So we're going to put this on the stack. Once the legend rule has resolved, one of these has to go to the graveyard. So Phyrexian Metamorph is going to go to the graveyard. That trigger is going to resolve, and it's going to return Phyrexian Metamorph back to the battlefield, which will enter as an exact copy of Sharuum once again, thus creating this infinite loop. Now we have Master Transmuter. This has a really fun activated ability. We can pay 1 blue mana, return any artifact we control back to its owner's hand, then we can put a artifact from our hand back onto the battlefield. Next, we have Kuldotha Forge Master. This is going to be a very good way of putting artifacts into our graveyard. That way we can return them with Sharuum if we need to. More importantly, this is going to allow us to search our library for any artifact card and put it straight on the battlefield. Now we have Thopter Assembly. Every single upkeep, if we control 0 Thopters, we can return Thopter Assembly back to our hand. We're going to use these 5 Thopter tokens to basically take infinite turns with a very certain artifact, which I'll get to in just a moment. Now, we have the absolute all-star of this deck. We have Memnarch. This card is absolutely ridiculous. We can pay a colorless and 2 blue, then that target permanent will become an artifact in addition to its other types. Or, we can pay 3 colorless and a blue and gain control of any artifact. That way, our opponents can't really do anything. This also synergizes very well with a very certain planeswalker, which I'll get to in just a moment. We have 3 very powerful planeswalkers that are really going to help us out. And what better one than Karn the Great Creator? He's going to enter the battlefield with 5 loyalty counters on him and has a very good static ability where activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control cannot be activated. You can +1 them, and until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact will become a artifact creature where its power and toughness are equal to its converted mana cost. And -2, we can choose a artifact we own from outside the game. We can get it back. Now we have Tezzeret the Seeker. He'll enter with 4 loyalty counters on him. When you +1 him, you can untap 2 target artifacts. You can remove loyalty counters from Tezzeret, and when you do, you get to search your library for an artifact card with that mana cost equal to the amount of loyalty counters you removed, and you put it straight on the battlefield. And if we have enough artifacts on the battlefield, when you -5 them, all artifacts become a 5/5 creature until the end of turn. He's basically marching the machines. Now, my personal favorite Tezzeret with Tezzeret Master of the Bridge. You can just sit back and keep +1ing him, and your opponents are going to lose a bunch of life. He'll enter with 5 loyalty counters on him and has the static ability where creatures and planeswalker spells have affinity for artifacts. Affinity was a very good mechanic where it'll reduce the cost of your artifact spells equal to the number of artifacts you control. But when you +2 him, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, will deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and you gain X life. You can -3 him to return a artifact card from your graveyard back to your hand. -8, you get to exile the top 10 cards of your library, and you can put every single artifact from among those on the battlefield. Okay, let's get into all the artifacts. First up are all the ones that'll produce mana. Naturally, we have Mox Opal. This costs 0 mana, and it'll add 1 mana of any color, but you can only do this if you control 3 or more artifacts, and that is not going to be hard in this deck. Of course, we have Soul Ring, we have Mana Vault, we have Arcane Signet, all 3 talismans. So we have Talisman of Progress, Talisman of Dominance, Talisman of Hierarchy. Now we have Basalt Monolith. This will add 3 colorless mana. You can produce infinite colorless mana with another very certain artifact, which I'll get to in just a moment. Of course, we have Chromatic Lantern. This is just to ensure that all our lands will produce the color that we really need, and it'll tap for any mana of color itself. And we have a bigger mana rock, so we have Gilded Lotus. This will tap for 3 mana of 1 color. Now we have some artifacts that are going to help us go get other artifacts. So we have Mishra's Bauble. This costs 0 as well, but when you sacrifice it, you get to look at the top card of anyone's library, then you draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. My personal favorite was Sensei's Divining Top. You can activate it to look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order, or you can activate it to draw a card, then you put Sensei's Divining Top back on top of its owner's library. A real fun trick with Sensei's Divining Top is when you activate it to draw the card to put Sensei's Divining Top back on top of your library, you can pay 1 and rearrange the order before that trigger resolves. Now, in case our opponents have destroyed a lot of our board and a lot of our artifacts and put them in the graveyard and we can't get them back, we have Elixir of Immortality. Plus, this will protect our life total as well. We can pay 2 colorless, we gain 5 life, and we shuffle Elixir and our graveyard back into our library. Now we have Wishclaw Talisman. This will enter with 3 wish counters on it. When you pay 1 colorless and activate it, you get to remove a wish counter, and then you search your library for any card, but our opponent is going to gain control of this. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why do I want to give my opponents anything? Because nothing is truly free in Magic. An artifact that allows you to demonic tutor is pretty good, but if you have Memnarch, just steal back the Wishclaw Talisman. Now we have Mystic Forge. We can look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can cast the top card if it happens to be a artifact or a colorless non-land card. And if we don't like the top card, we can pay 1 life to exile that. If we happen to exile certain things, we can get those back from exile with Karn the Great Creator. Now, because most of these artifacts have activated abilities, we have a bunch of ways that are going to synergize with tapping or untapping the artifacts to get as much value as possible. So we have Manifold Key. We can pay 1 colorless, untap another target artifact, or if we need to, we can pay 3 colorless, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. Of course, we have Voltaic Key. We can pay 1, untap another target artifact. Now we have 2 artifacts that are going to synergize very well with either Memnarch or Karn the Great Creator. So we have Liquid Metal Coating. We can activate this, and target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. Similar to that, we have Liquid Metal Torque. The only difference is this will tap for a colorless mana, and we can only target a non-land permanent. Now we have a very fun one. We have Simulacrum Synthesizer. When this enters the battlefield, we get to scry 2. Whenever another artifact with mana cost 3 or greater enters the battlefield, you're going to create a construct where its power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts you control. We can make a whole construct army with this card. Now we have Unwinding Clock. We get to untap all artifacts we control during each other player's untap step. Now we have Clock of Omens. This is going to be very good by untapping whatever we want just by tapping 2 untapped artifacts we control. Now we have all the artifacts that are basically just going to win us the game. So we have Sculpting Steel. Similar to Phyrexian Metamorph, this will enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact. You can do the Sharuum Infinite Convolute with this or Phyrexian Metamorph. Okay, now we have Altar of the Brood. This is going to trigger every single time another permanent enters the battlefield. Each opponent will mill the top card of their library. And that sounds like a lot of fun. Now, we have Time Sieve. We can activate this to sacrifice 5 artifacts and take an extra turn. This is the artifact that's going to pair so nicely with Thopter Assembly. So, when you have Thopter Assembly on the battlefield, it's going to trigger, return back to your hand, create the 5 Thopters. You can sacrifice those 5 Thopter tokens immediately with Time Sieve, take another turn after this, and really aggravate your opponents. Now we have Thopter Foundry. We can pay a colorless, sacrifice a non-token artifact, and we get to put a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying on the battlefield. Then we get to gain a life. And what better one to sacrifice than Sword of the Meek? Whenever another 1/1 creature enters the battlefield, we get to return Sword of the Meek from our graveyard attached to that creature. If we have Urza, Lord High Artificer, we can tap both of those for blue mana. That way we can infinitely sacrifice the Sword of the Meek. So we're going to create infinite blue mana, gain infinite life, or infinite Thopter tokens. Now we have Isochron Scepter. This is imprint. When Isochron Scepter enters the battlefield, we can exile another instant from our hand with mana cost 2 or less, and we can pay 2 colors, and when we activate this, we can cast a copy of the exile card without paying its mana cost. You could do this with counter spells or removal spells, but the best one I'll get to in just a moment. Of course, we have Kark Clan Ironworks. We can sacrifice any artifact for 2 colorless mana. Now we have Rings of Brighthearth. This is the artifact that's going to allow us to produce infinite colorless mana with Basalt Monolith. So how this works is what we're doing, we are copying Basalt Monolith's untap ability, because whenever we activate a ability, if it is not a mana ability, we can pay 2 colors and we can copy that ability and we can choose new targets. This card is absolutely messed up. We could even copy abilities of planeswalkers if we really wanted to. Now we have 2 very powerful artifacts. So we have Spine of Isha. When this enters the battlefield, we get to destroy target permanent, and if it would be put into a graveyard, we can return it back to our hand. So we can sacrifice this with KCI to add 2 colorless mana and Master Transmuter, and we can return Spine of Isha back to our hand. The other one is Portal to Phyrexia. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent will have to sacrifice 3 creatures. Every single upkeep, we can put any creature card from any graveyard into play under our control, and it'll be a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. Okay, let's get into the instants. All these instants are either going to be combo pieces, ways to go and search whatever artifact we want, or just straight up counter spells to protect our combos. First up, we have Enlightened Tutor. We can search our library for any artifact or enchantment, and that card goes on top of our library. Now, my personal favorite is Entomb. You can search your library for any card, and you put it straight into the graveyard. This is the #1 card for comboing off with Sharuum, because you get to search your library for either the Phyrexian Metamorph or Sculpting Steel. When you cast Sharuum, you're going to start that loop. Of course, we have Mystical Tutor. This will allow us to search our library for any instant or sorcery if we happen to need it at that time. Now, we have Whir of Invention. This costs 3 blue and X, but it also has Improvise. So we can tap untapped artifacts to reduce the cost of X by 1 colorless, and we can search our library for any artifact card with mana cost X or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. Now we have Dramatic Reversal. This is the card that we're going to imprint. That way we can untap all our non-land permanents just by casting it to produce infinite mana. Of course, we have Cyclonic Rift. This will help deal with our opponents. Now we have a whole bunch of counter spells. Of course, we have Force of Will, Force of Negation, we have Counterspell, we have Mana Drain. Mana Drain is going to be very beneficial for us because not only are we going to counter the spell, but we're going to add a whole bunch of colorless mana. Of course, we have Arcane Denial. Not only are you countering the spell, but you do get an additional card draw. Yes, your opponent will draw 2 cards, but more times than not, you're going to be drawing more powerful things than your opponents. Of course, we have Dovin's Veto, a uncounterable negate, and if things go really bad, we have Flusterstorm. We're going to counter target instant or sorcery unless its controller pays 1, but this is Storm. We're going to copy this spell for each spell that was cast. Okay, let's get into the sorceries. There's not very many. Most of these are just tutor effects or mass removal. So we have Fabricate. We get to search our library for any artifact card and put it into our hand. We have Demonic Tutor. That way we can go get any card and put it into our hand. Now we have Toxic Deluge, which is probably my all-time favorite mass removal spell in Commander. Of course, we have Supreme Verdict. We're going to destroy all creatures, and Supreme Verdict cannot be countered. Now we have Damnation. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. This is the Black Wrath of God. Now we have Bitter Ordeal. This is going to be absolutely backbreaking for your opponents because you're going to search target player's library for any card and you get to exile that card. But this says Gravestorm. So we're going to copy this for each permanent that was put into a graveyard that turn. Because of the Sharuum loop, you are putting a permanent from the battlefield into the graveyard an infinite number of times. You're going to exile every single opponent's entire library, and that's a lot of fun. Okay, let's get into the land base. This is a very streamlined, kind of expensive land base. So first up, we have Command Tower, we have Glimmer Void, we have Gemstone Caverns. If you're not the starting player, and this is in your opening hand, you can exile a card from your hand, put Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield with a luck counter on it, and if it has the luck counter on it, you can add 1 mana of any color. Now we got some fetch lands. So we have Flooded Strand, Polluted Delta, and Marsh Flats. Now we need the lands to go get. So we have Rafine's Tower, Hallowed Fountain, Watery Grave, and Galashon. This does have 1 dual land. It is Tundra. Now we have the Surveil lands. The Surveil lands are going to be very, very helpful in this build because we want to look for either Phyrexian Metamorph or the Sculpting Steel and ensure that's in our graveyard. So we have Undercity Sewers, Meticulous Archive, and Shadowy Backstreet. Now we have the check lands. So we have Glacial Fortress, Drowned Catacomb, and Isolated Chapel. Now we have the Battle Bond lands. So we have Morphic Pool, Sea of Clouds, and Vault of Champions. Now we have the filter lands. So we have Sunken Ruins, Fetid Heath, and Mystic Gate. I don't usually recommend the filter lands, but in 3 color or more builds, I think they're kind of necessary because you do need very specific colors and they do help you get to that point. Of course, we have the artifact lands. So we have Ancient Den, Seat of the Synod, and Vault of Whispers. Now we have some colorless utility lands that are really going to help us out. Of course, we have Ancient Tomb. This will deal 2 damage to you, but you'll add 2 colorless mana. Now we have probably the best one with Urza Saga. Chapter 1, you get to add 1 colorless mana. Chapter 2, you can pay 2 colorless, create a construct. Chapter 3, you get to search your library for any artifact with mana cost 1 or 0 and put it straight onto the battlefield. So you can go get your Soul Ring, you can go get your Mox Opal, you can go get a artifact land if you really need to. Now we have Academy Ruins. It will tap for a colorless, but you can pay a colorless and a blue and put any artifact from your graveyard back on top of your library. Now we have Inventor's Fair. Every single upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you get to gain a life. It'll tap for a colorless mana, or you can pay 4, sacrifice Inventor's Fair, search your library for any artifact card. This is just another way to search for the artifact you really need. Now we have the Mycosynth Garden. This is kind of like a catch-all land. It'll tap for a colorless mana, or you can pay 1 to add 1 mana of any color. What makes this card very useful in this build is you can pay X, and then Mycosynth Gardens will become a copy of target non-token artifact with mana value of X. Unfortunately, you can only do this once. We have 1 plains, 1 island, and 1 swamp. And that was the Commander deck tech for Sharuum the Hegemon. I really hope you guys enjoyed this revisit to this Esper artifact build. If you guys have any suggestions on how to improve this build, or you generally absolutely really like this build, let me know in the comments below. I'll leave the link to the Moxfield deck list in the comments like always. And until next time, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share these videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.